Hello, today I'm going to be talking about copy editing and proofreading pornography and erotica. Should you edit it or proofread pornography? What if it's erotica? Is there even a difference? And does sexually explicit material even deserve to be edited when it's in written form? What is it exactly? What is it not? And if you do want to edit it, how do you make yourself visible to authors of porn? It may be that you've got really strict criteria for the types of or subgenres of pornography and erotica that you're prepared to edit. And in that case, the problem becomes, how do you communicate these to potential clients? So this is my take, and it is only my take. Some of my colleagues won't touch this stuff with a barge pole, and those of us who do, of course, we have our own individual boundaries. And that's the first thing any editor needs to recognise, I think. The term pornography is loaded with subjectivism and preconceptions, many of them heteronormative. And so what you're expecting and what actually ends up in your editing studio could be two very different things. One thing we can say is that the definitions are contested in society, in courts, in the academic literature, and that makes it really difficult for the editor who's asked, do you copy edit pornography? Because even if you think you do, or you think you don't, other people might think the opposite because they have different opinions of what constitutes porn. So what do we do? I think that custom guidelines are probably the answer, particularly if you decide to publicise the fact that you're happy to edit sexually explicit material. But I do think before I talk about those, I want to think a little bit more about erotica, because one of the trickiest things is actually working out what the difference is between pornography and erotica. So is there even a difference? I think that the lines are more clearly drawn in people's own heads and are rarely shared by anyone else that you consult on the matter. So when I was researching the blog article that complements this video, what became quite clear to me was that there seems to be quite a bit of support for the idea that if there's enough of a celebration of the human form, or if the plot's strong enough or the characterisation is strong enough in a novel, then it can move beyond definitions of pornography and into erotica. I do think that that's slightly problematic though, because you could have a situation where a writer intends to create erotica, but because their novel craft isn't yet developed enough, they end up creating pornography. And the converse of that is if the author's just written sex that aims for nothing but titillation, but they've written it really beautifully, really artfully, does that mean it's no longer porn, or is it now erotica? And so I'm not sure that these definitions of art versus smut are particularly helpful for editors or for authors for that matter. One thing I do know is that to make a decision, you're going to need to see a sample. And if you only do want to work with certain types of material, then we're back to the issue of some guidelines. The guidelines don't just help you and the writer decide whether you're a good fit. They're also a really good way of demonstrating your engagement with the subject and your willingness to have a conversation with a nervous or embarrassed author. So what should you include? Well, there's no one way of going about this. There never is. Include whatever's important to you and what you want the author to know. So you could include your personal definitions of pornography and erotica and, say, romantic fiction or some other genres and subgenres. It's a good opportunity as well to acknowledge that the author's definitions might differ and that that's fine. You could also use it as an opportunity to make it clear what kinds of materials aren't pornography as defined by the law. You could create a summary of the laws in your jurisdiction regarding sexually explicit material, written or otherwise. You could list the genres and subgenres that you're comfortable editing and those you'd rather not. You could perhaps talk about the degree to which you'd feel comfortable editing depictions of adult sexual consensual violence. And you might also want to discuss how you identify in terms of sexuality, gender, faith, race, ethnicity, and to what degree you'd feel confident editing material in which the character's identity was different. And lastly, you might think about clarifying the level of profanity that you're comfortable editing. So these aren't set in stone, they're just ideas that you might use to think about how you might begin to put together some guidelines. Thinking now to pornography and erotica and whether they're worth editing. I think they are. The pornography and erotica writers for whom I've worked are as committed to their writing as any crime fiction, thriller or literary fiction author I've ever worked with. and non-fiction authors too. And while it's true that usually when I'm dealing with sexually explicit material, I'm not always dealing with strong plot and characterisation, but that doesn't mean that the writing isn't strong and imaginative and funny and clever. And I've certainly worked with writers where the turns of phrase were almost poetic at times. And yet, prior to editing, those books weren't publishable because they didn't conform to recognised standards of spelling, punctuation and grammar. And that meant that the reader would have struggled to enjoy the stories because they'd have been constantly pulled out of the text. It's no different to any other genre. And that's my job, and yours, to help every author that we work with help the reader. And it doesn't matter, in my view, whether the writing is sexually explicit or not. I think that pornography and erotica are absolutely worthy of being edited. So as editors, we need to think about the market. We know there's a market for pornography and erotica. There are readers with an appetite for those genres, and there are writers ready to feed it. And those writers need editors to help them make those stories as good as they can possibly be. So if you're comfortable working on adult material, then you'll do well to make this clear, because my research showed that there is a dearth of professional editors advertising the fact that they will take on adult fiction material. When I was researching the article, I did some searches on the Society for Editors and Proofreaders Directory of Editorial Services and also the Editors Canada online Directory of Editors, using keywords like crime fiction, erotica, fiction, philosophy, politics, pornography, romance, science fiction, suspense, thriller, and pornography and erotica had the fewest editors and proofreaders available. So in both those countries, at least, you'll have the least competition in those directories if you're prepared to edit porn and erotica. That's something to think about. So how about being visible, actually getting the work? Imagine a political science professor. She'd be drawn to editors and proofreaders who make it explicit that they welcome this type of work, have experience of editing the subject matter, and provide resources and guidance that demonstrates that expertise. Pornography and erotica authors are no different to political science professors. And so, if you have relevant works from the genres in your existing portfolio, make sure that that's listed on your website or your directory entries. Look at the description of your website in the search engines and make sure that yours is complete and contains keywords that you might want to be found for, including things like erotica, pornography, adult fiction. Think about also your content marketing. Create resources and articles that help solve authors' problems in these genres. So some authors might struggle with biology, others with repetition, yet others with clarity. Some might benefit from advice on how to approach an editor without fear or embarrassment. Are there useful writing resources about pornography and erotica that you could curate? All that content tells the author that you're engaged and willing to discuss the subject. And then when you publish those resources on your website, you'll be more visible in the search engines, particularly if those resources are high quality, which they should be, of course, and they're talked about, recommended, shared and linked to. I also think it's important to talk about anxiety, both ours as editors and our authors. Some editors are keen to take on this work, but they're anxious that it might reflect badly on them. So does being public about your willingness to edit pornography and erotica damage your reputation? I don't think so. Pornography and erotica are recognised genres, and I think that as long as we present our willingness to edit them with the same professionalism that we'd approach politics or philosophy or romance, I don't see that there should be any problem. I and several of my editor friends are quite open about the fact that we work on adult material and none of us has suffered problems acquiring work. And I think part of that's down to the fact that we're committed to marketing our editorial businesses and to focusing on the value we bring to the table. And ultimately that's what clients concentrate on, not the things that are of no interest to them. So a thriller writer cares that I work on thrillos, not that I also happen to copy edit erotica and historical fiction. Nervous Nellies don't just live in the world of editing though. Some of the writers who've contacted me about editing porn and erotica are anxious too, and it's not uncommon to receive emails that start with something on the lines of, oh, I feel a little embarrassed about this, but, or I hope you don't mind me asking, but. And again, I think that's where the guidelines can really come in to help reassure a nervous author before they send the email. So I hope you found this useful. If you're happy to edit porn and erotica, I think you should go for it. If the thought makes you shudder, that's fine too. It's your choice. We're independent business owners and we can choose what material we want to work on and what we don't. However, wanting to edit a particular genre isn't enough. Make sure your willingness to edit porn and erotica is visible on your website and in the editorial directories you advertise. That way you'll get seen. If you don't say it, you won't get heard. Bye for now.